Welcome to Talking Jazz. My guest today is Adam Rudolph, and we'll talk about a new release coming up this year, this summer, but also some previous releases, and just about making creative music. I'll call it that for now, and I'll ask about that later. So welcome, Adam.
Thank you for having me.
It's great to have you. So I usually ask listeners to just give me a synopsis at the beginning of who they are and how they got into this music thing, because many people might not know you. So give us the synopsis of Adam Rudolph. Where are you from and what got you into this music realm?
Actually, people really want to know the story. Nowadays, to take up our time doing that, it's a good question, but, it's all on the website. Everything is there, more than you ever wanted to know. I've been doing this for over 50 years. I grew up in the Hyde Park area of Chicago, which is on the south side of Chicago. And my father was a huge music fan, very deep into music. The neighborhood was a very fertile and amazing time. My neighbors I used to be able to go hear Howlin' Wolf and Muddy Waters live all the time, and Otis Spann. My neighbors were like the Art Ensemble of Chicago, Steve McCall, Henry Threadgill. But I also came up a lot in Detroit as well, musically. When I was 17, I met Charles Moore and Kenny Cox. So I feel like this music in my generation was part of what we would call an oral tradition, where the way you didn't really go to school, a formal school to learn, but you learn from being around, being mentored by older musicians playing in their group. So I was very fortunate in Chicago. I started out playing with Malawi Nuruddin and Fred Anderson, and then in Detroit with Charles Moore and Kenny Cox. These were my first really important mentors in music. Later, of course, by 1978, I had met Don Cherry, was the first person who took me to Europe on tour. And then another very important mentor of mine was Yusef Lateef, who I met in 1988 and worked with him up until his passing in 2012. In addition to doing my own music, of course, my own groups. These were important people for me. And an important event in my life, other than starting to tour in Europe with Don, was that I lived in Ghana in 1977 for a year, and that was very transformative. But again, all these things, it's all on, the Meta Records website. There's all kinds of stories and information and articles and things like that.
We'll send people there. So tell us, so the Meta Records, how do you find it?
metarecords.com. Yeah, that's I started my own record label in the early 1990s, recorded with several labels, along with many other artists. Felt that self-determined, number one, I wanted to own the masters of my music, and the kind of self-determination of sharing what my creative output was without having to sort of ask or convince anybody was really what I wanted to do. And of course, this tradition goes back to Max Roach and Charles Mingus, and even further to, Betty Carter and Horace Silver, and even further back to W.C. Handy, who started Black Swan Records, right? So this is a time-honored tradition. And so now I have, 30 or 40 releases out on Meta Records. I've kept the label pretty close to being an outlet for what I do, but I have records out of collaborations I've done with Pharoah Sanders and Sam Rivers, with Dada Leo Smith, and of course Yusef and others. And I do release things in partnership with other labels on occasion. If I license things to them, I always retain ownership. So a couple years ago, I released a record I did that Benny Maupin played on, called A Symphonic Tone Poem for Brother Yusef. And that came out on Strut Records, which is a European, British label. And then these two records with Tyshawn are actually in a partnership with this wonderful label in Greece called Defkaz. Really enjoy working with them. But again, we retain all the ownership and rights to it. So that's a collaboration between Meta and Defkaz and Tyshawn's label.
That's really neat. And thanks for showing us this network of labels, because it seems this is a real small niche genre, but there's a really strong network around the world making it happen. And that's so cool about it. And that first one we're going to listen to is actually from an earlier release, one of the trio ones that you did with Tyshawn and David Liebman. So we're going to listen to part one of this record. Anything you want to give us on the way to listen to or for or get in the mode before we get it started?
Actually, that's a really great question. Yeah, how to listen to music, right? I don't think about music in terms of categories or niches or styles. The way I listen to music, I guess I could answer it that way, is I love to listen to music, and I've listened all my life to music from everywhere in the world. that I can get a hold of, everywhere. I find it endlessly fascinating. I always want to learn more about music, more about the humanity of, creative expression. So for me, I think the way to listen for me is to let go of preconceptions, let go of your filters, let go of expectations. And I try to tune into the feeling of the music. And what I mean by that is that music is an expression of the contents of consciousness, which has an imperative to know itself. And so what you're listening for, what I listen for, is I would call it let me put it another way. The Dogon people, I visited the Dogon in Mali, the cliff dwellers. They have a word in their language called mi, M-I. And what M-I, mi, means is the spirit of the person expressed through the voice of the instrument. I'm listening to the spirit of the person, the feeling of the person. I'm not, and of course, when you listen with that kind of open-heartedness, I think other things that people look for in terms of you'll have a sense of form. We're dealing with form. We're dealing with motion and rhythm. We're dealing with color and harmony, but in a way that people may or may not be familiar with. So if you let go of those expectations and listen to it in kind of a aboriginal way of your own original sense of being, which is, by the way, the state of which we try to reach for making the music. This music, in a way, people might think of it that it's challenging to listen to, but it's challenging in the sense of the utmost respect for the listener. That is, we're not pandering. So the challenge of it is that it invites, it's not even a challenge, it's an invitation to engage with the sound creatively yourself. In other words, the listener and the person who's generating the music, everybody's involved in creative action. And that's where the value of it, to me, is in that relationship. Maybe that's a roundabout answer to the question, but that's how I think about it.
Well, we just got some philosophical depth on how to engage here, and I hope everybody was A, listening to that, and B, can now fully focus on part one that is coming up. This is a trio featuring my guest today, Adam Rudolph, together with Dave Liebman on saxophone and Tyshawn Sorey also on percussion and all kinds of instruments.
Well, yeah. So I just wanted to mention, I guess I should have not gone so quickly to mention that people, your listeners who are not familiar with Dave Liebman, he's an NEA jazz master. He's playing soprano saxophone only on this, one of the great living masters in this music. People may know him from his work with Miles Davis or Elvin Jones or his many, many recordings. And also Tyshawn Sorey, just to mention him. He's playing primarily what's called the traditional drum kit on this record. The other percussion and the electronics, what I'm doing is, I don't know if people are aware, I'm primarily, besides my work as a composer and conductor, I'm a play hand drums and all kinds of percussion and electronics.
We'll mention and give credit where credit deserves, but I'm sure Dave Liebman is a household character for everybody. That was part one from a trio recording with my guest today, Adam Rudolph, composer, percussionist, and also featuring Dave Liebman on saxophone and Tyshawn Sorey. And we were just chatting of, how these people, of course, they're legends for us. We were thinking about how far it transcends. And if it's clear that, for example, David Liebman is, of course, an NEA jazz master and has been playing with all the greats for many decades. And Tyshawn, he's been making a lot of waves lately, I would say. He's been doing a lot of great things. And I would say, especially in the younger generation, there's a real trust and some wave going on. Would you agree?
Yeah, Tyshawn is very talented, and it's a pleasure always to play music with him and with Dave too, because there's a chemistry there, which is very important, the alchemical aspect. And because Tyshawn is a composer also, as am I and Liebman, there's a way in which we approach the music that I think is impacted by that. In other words, everybody's aware not only of what I would call the micro dialogue, which is the very quick back and forth of conversation, but also when you're with musicians who understand composition, they understand about form and timbre, inhalation and exhalation. So what that means is that we're creating on what I might call the macro level, the bigger sense of what is the stance that you're going to take at any moment as the music unfolds. We're not really involved in the codification of instrumentation. We don't even have a codified kind of instrumentation in this trio. What you choose, whether you choose to lay out or what instrument you pick up or how you approach it, what your stance is at any moment is also is equally important. So with these, and it's special when you work with musicians who really understand that and have the knowledge and experience and insight and open-mindedness to be able to do that, then you can travel the spaceways.
That's really well put. And so actually Tyshawn is your partner, your duo partner on this very new upcoming release. And I loved the way how it was described, not only as a new release and when it comes out, but also on 180-gram vinyl, meaning quality is also measured by the quality of the product it's on in this case. And we're going to listen to one of the sides. So we have to understand that the reason why we have vinyl here is that each side is a complete piece. And we're going to listen to the second one, the B side. And you're using a system or conduction system technique here. And I'd be curious if you could share a little bit what cues are given, what the musicians know, what happens, and guide us a little bit before we're going to take off in this whole LP side.
Sure, thank you. Yeah, and actually, if I could just go back a little bit, I want to give thanks to Giannis, who's the owner of DefCaz. He's the one who's putting these beautiful packages together in the 180-gram. Was interested in my own artwork for the cover and the insides, the inserts. I've been painting for my whole life also, and drawing. Just to be clear, so there's Archaisms 1, which is a duet, and Archaisms 2, which is a quintet. We're talking about listening to number 2, is that right? Second.
Correct.
So yeah, so it was a continuous performance. For this one, I had a thought that after Tyshawn and I had done our duet, I've always had this idea of working with an expanded percussion ensemble. 3 percussionists who I invited them to bring Russell Greenberg, Sei Hashimoto, and Mr. Levi. I invited them to bring their own kind of setup. They're sort of classically trained avant percussionists. Anyway, so as far as the conducting, I don't really use the word conduction. My good friend, the late Butch Morris, had a trademark on that, and he did a very particular thing that he did with it. I actually developed my own ideas about spontaneous conducting when I lived in California for years with my project I've done since 1998 or 99 called Go Organic Orchestra. It wasn't until much, much later that I met Butch and learned about what he was doing. But this tradition also goes back. I mean, Dizzy Gillespie did Sun Ra, Muhal Richard Abrams, even his name slips my mind right now, a classical composer, Lucas Foss. There's a lot of interesting threads that lead to this. In any case, my language with this project, I used a simplified hand signals from my Go Organic Orchestra language. I also sent the musicians ahead some of what I use in the organic orchestra, which is written, they're intervallic cosmograms. And if this is an idea that's intriguing to people, actually, I recently published a book called Sonic Elements, where in addition to my rhythm concept of cyclic verticalism, there are quite a few of these different kinds of intervallic cosmograms and matrices. So a cosmogram is a multi-dimensional way of it's a way of notating interval relationships that invites a multi-dimensional interpretation. In other words, Western notation is something that has to be read left to right, and it gives you what range you're in, all of these kinds of things. So, for example, one of them I gave the musicians is what's called a triple diminished cosmogram, which is a way of working with, maybe you know about triple diminished, but it's a way of working with 12 tones. So it allows them to interpret those materials through their own language and their feeling and their phraseology. But we're all talking about the same topic. Anyway, so the simplified conducting I did with them, one thing I did, for example, was this idea I gleaned from studying Japanese music and cosmology called Jo-Ha-Kyu. And this is something you find in many of the arts, the theater, dance, music in Japan. It's three gestures, which is sort of a attack of some kind, an initial attack, and then a development of whatever that idea is, and then a accelerando or an increasing of energy back to the beginning again. And you'll hear this if you listen to like gagaku music or music that goes with the no theater. So this was an effective technique to use. But I didn't have to conduct them, having said all that, I did not need to conduct them a lot. Along with Taishan, they were very sensitive listeners. They were cultivated improvisers. They played towards the center of the feeling of what we were doing. Mm-hmm. So that freed me up to actually play quite a bit. So I'm also not just conducting, but I'm playing. So this side too, I think it starts where Taishan is on the piano. I'm conducting and playing my electronics and hand drums. And then towards the end, I think he switches to the drum kit, and then I'm on the piano and he's conducting. So we did that and he has his own methodology, by the way, which is very interesting. It was interesting to sort of learn something about his way of doing things. I should mention Taishan is you can hear, I don't have to mention it, people can hear, he's an outstanding pianist. I have my own way. He loves the way I play piano. I'm more of a minimal, composurely pianist. I think Taishan, being a big fan of Morton Feldman, he appreciates my slow motion, careful intervallic choices. So anyway, yeah, that's.
And thank you. Yeah, that's fascinating insights, and thanks for mentioning the book and several books. I assume they are also probably available on the Meta Records website, or is that a good place?
I have two books. I have two books: Sonic Elements, which is about this intervallic material of matrices and cosmograms and rhythms, my rhythm concept. My first book was called Pure Rhythm, which is hundreds and hundreds of rhythms that I've generated and also that I've gleaned in my studies. Both of these books do not use Western notation. Mm-hmm. They use, and I think if people want to see samples of the pages, yeah, they can find it on the Meta Records website. Purchasing them now, the Pure Rhythm was released originally with Shot Music, but now the ownership was back with me. You can only find them on the Meta Records Bandcamp page, but the links are there on the Meta Records page. You can see some samples. And so, yeah, they're going, I mean, I'm in my third or fourth printing. They go all over the world, slowly but steadily. And the books were not meant to be anything kind of definitive, but they were there to kind of show what I'm thinking about. Oh, by the way, the Sonic Elements book also has 21 philosophical essays that I wrote. You're probably getting a sense that I think a lot about music and so-called music and what it means. And you being having your doctorate, I'm sure you also have done a lot of reading and whatever. So these are embedded in that Sonic Elements book to give some kind of contextualization for the interval material and the rhythm material and my musical views in general.
Fascinating. I'm going to dig into it, I promise, and I hope some others will too. But let's get on this journey. So I decided we're going to listen to this whole thing. You could say, well, let's have an excerpt, but if it's a piece that belongs together and it was conceived in this whole side of record, I think we should go all on this journey together. So we're going to listen to Archaisms 2, the B-side, and this is going to be out in June. So most likely this will be for many a preview of what's coming up. I would say just get in the mode and follow along what's happening and take the journey. That was Archaisms 2, the B-side, a new release featuring or created by my guest today, Adam Rudolph, who you heard on percussion, piano, various instruments, also with his partner Taishan Sori, and a group of percussionists on this one. Later at the end, we'll get the Archaism 1, just the duo aspect, but we're going to sneak in one more different selection from a different recording. This was an earlier recording, the U vibrations, if I say that right, but we can talk about it in a minute. But what I loved about it, that you explained it as boongi music, if I say that right, or meaning things transpire categories here. And we have this tendencies as humans to always want to have things. This is jazz, this is new music, this is something else. And in Europe, it's even worse about it, because if you get into the new music category versus the jazz category, you're way better off economically too, because there's a hierarchy to it too. So I'm just curious, I love how you give us your philosophies and different outlooks to give us this, your sense of us having to put things into categories and how you communicate the essence of your music without having to do that.
Well, actually, the Serpentine, the Timeless record, which is a project I've had for many years called Who, H-U, which if people don't know, that's something worth investigating by itself. Who comes from the Sufi, referencing breath, vibrational. Actually, that record, it came out, it's an LP also with beautiful, beautiful art. It came out prior to Archaisms 1 and 2, but actually it was recorded, I think, in between. It was a project I was working on for a period of a couple years. I mean, my interests, it might be surprising to hear it sandwiched between these two archaisms. What you said is really correct about people having the idea of class in music and what's, where money is and what's respected. That's all. It has nothing to do with anything, except the perpetuation of, people's jobs and how they want to present things and categories. But it doesn't really have to do anything with the essence of what music is really all about. And yeah, maybe Europe, perhaps the class. I mean, we have the class thing here too. Joe Chambers, the great drummer, once said to me, I don't use the word jazz to describe my music because jazz means low money and bad venues, I don't use the word jazz in relation to my music. And I think the jazz people who do like to call their music jazz would agree with me. They're fine with that, Take it for granted that my own artistic interests are wide, and wherever they lead me, I follow them as far as I can. This piece, Serpentine, I try and make it heartfelt, it's sincere. Again, it's like listening to it, it's like, oh, that reminds me of this. Oh, that reminds me of that. Or it doesn't sound like his other music. It's like, I don't even know what to say about that, except, again, if we listen with kind of without expectation and just what the feeling of the music is, I think that's a way to live, Our forsythia is coming up now, the flowers, right? So I like forsythia, but I can like daffodils too, Why do I have to only like forsythia? I mean, it's no funny to me how that whole idea, Every culture has values of what's significant to them. And then it becomes even a whole other thing where there's power, politics, and economics involved. But again, the buying and selling. But none of these things have anything to do really with what the impetus of expression is all about, as far as I'm concerned.
Thanks. Great insights. And yeah, you're making me all get deeper into the art. Sometimes we really, really forget to, we need to scratch that or not scratch the surface and go deep. So let's just have a listen. So this is Serpentine, and very, very different style, combining lots of different musical elements. This is from the album In Between, the Archaism, I guess. Find out more at the Meta Records website, and you'll get all the releases. But enjoy Serpentine. That was a piece entitled Serpentine. My guest today is Adam Rudolph, who pretty much composed all the aspects and parts to this one. And we're going to dive into one last segment. And we were just talking about, inspiring each other and really getting back to just the essence of the music. And I think that's probably the number one lesson we're taking away today, especially when we're going to listen to this last piece, the Archaisms 1, the duet part. But before we let it ring all the way through on this, what's coming up next? What's the next project?
A week coming up at the Stone, which is the venue at the New School that John Zorn has organized. It's been there for years. I'm usually there once a year. So I'm going to do a duet with Dave Liebman, one night, a duet with Peter Affelbaum, and then I'm going to do 2 nights with a new quartet called the Sunrise Quartet with Stephen Haynes, Alexis on cornet and winds, and didgeridoo and conch shells. Alexis Marcello, who's worked with me a lot, who I met working with Yusuf Lateef on piano and keyboards. Karu Watanabe, who's a fantastic no-con, fue, and taiko. That's happening, and then I'm going to meet my brother, who's an astrophysicist, and we're going to view the eclipse. And then, a bunch of other concerts, rolling out into and so on. Oh, actually, the Who Vibrational is going to play in early May. Bang on a Can does what they call a long play festival in New York. And Who Vibrational is going to play there, the 7-piece ensemble of that. I'm writing a lot of music for all of these projects. I have another trio record where we're kind of seeing what we're going to do with it. And then in June, I'm going to do some more concerts with Andre 3000. I was a guest with them at St. Anne's Church in New York, and they've invited me to join them for a few other concerts, and that's really fun to do, just show up and play. Anyway, thank you so much.
I really appreciate you taking the time to share today. So let's have some time to listen to the music. So we'll get to Archaisms 1, Side A. And yeah, thank you, Adam Rudolph. Good luck with everything, and hope to hear lots more.
Thank you, Monika.
Thank you for listening to Talking Jazz. My guest today was composer, percussionist Adam Rudolph.
You can hear Talking Jazz every Thursday at 11 a.m. and Mondays at 7 p.m. on WETF 105.7 in South Bend, Indiana, or online at jazzradiowetf.org, and Fridays at 8 p.m. on WICR 88.7 Indianapolis. Previous shows are also on my YouTube channel, Monika Herzig, MonikaHerzig. Please subscribe to the Talking Jazz playlist. Thank you for listening.